Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Carol Ha, Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the Freer and Sackler Galleries, the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. Welcome to today's Join the Curator program, featuring artist Vivan Sundaram. Thank you all for joining us. Vivan Sundaram received his BFA from the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda in 1965 and his post-diploma from the Slade School of Fine Art, London in 1968. His work incorporates diverse media, including painting, photography, video, sculpture, found objects, and performance. Recent exhibitions of his work have been presented at the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art in New Delhi, the Haus der Kunst in Munich, the Crow Collection in Dallas, the Fowler Museum in Los Angeles, and numerous others throughout the world. Sundaram is a founding member of the pioneering Kasoli Art Center and of the long-standing activist collective, the Safdar Hashmi Memorial Trust. He is a managing trustee of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation. Sundaram is represented by CPI in New York. Dr. Paul Sternberger received his PhD in art history from Columbia University and joined the faculty of Rutgers, New York in 1997. His publications include Between Amateur and Aesthete, The Legitimization of Photography in America, 1880 to 1900, and By Its Cover, Modern American Book Cover Design. In 2007, Sternberger co-curated the groundbreaking exhibition, India, Public Places, Private Spaces, Contemporary Photography and Video Art. His articles and reviews have appeared in numerous journals, such as The History of Photography, American Art, the Journal of the History of Collections, and Arts of Asia. In today's program, Vivan and Paul will trace Vivan's prolific career and discuss the multifaceted ways in which history, memory, and media have shaped a truly thought-provoking and rich body of work. So I now turn it over to you, Vivan and Paul. It is truly wonderful to have you with us.
And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Carol for having us and the rest of the folks at the Smithsonian for choreographing this with us, and also thanks to Essa Epstein at CPI for helping to get us together to have this conversation. And indeed, this conversation is going to be broad and wide-ranging. We're going to cover some 55 years of Vivan's work, over a dozen bodies of work that is indeed, as Carol said, very multifaceted. And rather than a linear or chronological progression, we're going to think of it in more of a nonlinear way, rather picking out thematic trajectories and strategies in Vivan's work. And I wanted to get us into it by actually just showing a video that I made just last week at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is a video of part of the new installation of the ongoing Epic Abstraction exhibition at the Met. And you can see you have Jackson Pollock, we have Klein, we have de Kooning, there's a Frankenthaler to the right, and a Klein, and Still, Hans Hofmann in the background there. And here we are. To our right is Assai Twombly, and as we approach, it's a Vivan Sundaram. And I love this video because it gives us a sense of Vivan's place in the history. And I wanted to give Vivan a moment to speak about this work. And I think it'll give us a nice entryway into the multiplicity of content and strategies that Vivan takes.
Thank you, Paul, for introducing this work. And I must say that it holds well with all the great masters. And if I can quote a dear departed friend, Oqui and Wieser, and he said in his way, Vivan, these are historic works. And the fact that they are here is quite exceptional, that they should be included in a show of abstraction, where I'm normally known to be a figurative artist with political content. Very quickly, R.B. Kitai was my tutor in the Slade, and he directed me to see an exhibition of Persian miniatures. And I came home with these white pieces. And what I mean is that Persian miniatures have spaces embedded in them meant for text. And then a young man my age called P. Adam Sidney came because he said, I want to promote the American underground cinema. And he introduced who he loved, Stan Brakhage. And I was really so moved by it, and also the very fact that it was very much as if it was a work for art coming from an artist. And he said, I'm not interested in depth, but I'm interested in the fact that cinema can be about surface and about movement. And so embedded in this work are these two references, and it's not the place here to examine them. So let's move to the next slide.
Sure. And here, we chose this work to discuss first because this series is represented in the National Museum of Asian Art. And we wanted to make a nod to our hosts and really start here because it's literally at home for them. And this is a series that Vivan has done. And I just want to give us a slight background to the references and let Vivan speak more about the work itself. But Vivan comes from a very illustrious family, including the one of India's most important modernist painters, Amrita Shergill. And along with that family comes an archive of, among other things, images. And so what you see here is Vivan using images of his family members, Amrita, his grandfather, his mother, in this construction. I'll let Vivan talk more about it.
Yeah, I'd like to say that for me, this is a kind of montage of images where there is both a kind of lateral relationship between each of them. And in a manner of speaking, I've taken this photograph because you can see me reflected in the mirror. So in a sense that what my grandfather produced these remarkable images, that then I, through this kind of body of work, actually brought it from the family album into the public domain. And it has made Umrao Singh one of the pioneers of modern Indian photography.
We'll show you one more from that series.
Sorry. Well, to continue, that the relationship between my using the digital tool, which now is obvious, that I could then enter this family album like most people have. And Umrao Singh, when he got married, he started, of course, with his children and his wife, and also exceptionally with himself. So there was a narcissism about it. But this image of him, which people think that he's some yogi come down from the mountains, this is actually in his diary, and after an experiment of 14 days of fasting. And he poses himself, and I bring this into their lovely home in Paris. And on the wall is a portrait of Boris Taslitsky, Amrita's lover, who also happened to be a communist. And so the relationship of the trio then develops a narrative.
Great, thank you. And I think what we're starting to see emerge here is this engaging history, this rethinking, restructuring, recreating narratives, and also thinking about informal terms, how things are arranged. And I think these are all aspects that we'll see developing more and more as we get deeper into Vivan's career. And the Retake series was not the first time that Vivan had used the family archive as a quarry for artistic activities. And I want to give Vivan a chance to tell us a little bit about this installation that uses the archive.
Can I interrupt to the organizers that Paul is seen speaking, but I am not. So is there a reason for that? in the side box that I'm not seeing?
I can tell you that I'm seeing you, Vivan.
Oh,
So
I see. Is that how it is? All right. That's fine then. Okay. Yeah, well, the work after the retake of this is actually earlier, and for me to use the word archive was very unusual. The word archive became much more in use much later. And next, please. And what interested me was that the relationship between the people and the photographic image,
sorry, Vivan.
that they could also be things and objects. And this relationship between the materiality of things and objects and in relationship to personal histories and to larger histories, you will see running through a lot of the work. So this base of the object and its sensuousness and its materiality will inform a large body of the work.
This is another piece from the Schererville Archive installation. These, for those of you who are familiar with photography, or if you're not, these are transparencies. They're called Autochromes, one of the first versions of color photography. So they're backlit images, so they kind of glow from beneath.
So for every image, I was interested in the form, and here you can see that it's a fairly large object, and the object with the way the names are, that they almost look as if they could be a kind of tombstones with the names of their birth and death. So the relationship between death reoccurs in a lot of the works.
Now, I wanted to transition here with this amazing photograph of Vivan in the late 60s in London to make the point that it's not just family histories that he's dealing with and thinking about by any means. And from the moments that he is in art school in the 1960s, involved in political and social activism as part of that moment in history, these larger social and political issues have been brought into his work. In fact, that first painting we looked at is from 1968, from the same period of as this photograph. And we wanted to quickly introduce you to just a couple of the series that Vivan has explored as over the years as he has thought about these historical moments, including that moment we just saw, the late 1960s, this painting from the same era as the painting at the Met, where we see him in an abstract way kind of interpreting the violence between students and police. That figure you see on the left with the fiery object down below is an abstracted policeman, the white figure or figure-like form referring to the student protesters. So again,
yeah, please Paul. Well, the moment of May 68, I was working in my studio and really an apolitical person, but the situation was such that you couldn't keep your cubicle to yourself. You had, to connect to other people. The other aspect of it was that being a person of color, there was already a great deal of racism, and that the student union people asked me to come out and get involved when Enoch Paul was coming there. So one was literally thrown into political activism. And if I can be anecdotal, on the 19th of March, 68, one of the largest protests took place outside the American embassy, where many stars came to stop their attack on Vietnam. And that's how literally I became political.
And it didn't end. And again, just some examples of how through the years he's addressed these historical moments, both the past and the present. This is from a series called Long Nights that Vivan did of charcoal drawings that were inspired by visits that he made to World War II concentration camps in Poland. And
I'd like to just add that the Slade introduced a remarkable course on the history of cinema. And many of these images, when I went to Poland as a state guest and they took me to Auschwitz, I was amazed at how the cinema that I saw of the World War and of the concentration camps came back very vividly. So this charcoal drawing has a great sense of anguish, of depth, of the violence that is being assaulted on the people and on the land. And this is just one example of about 60 that are done in this series.
And Vivan has also addressed very much contemporary historical issues. This is from a series called Engine Oil and Charcoal that he did in response to the first Gulf War, where literally he's like the last series working in charcoal, but now has added to the drawings another medium, used engine oil, and allowed it to soak into the piece itself. The title here referring to the 100,000 sorties, bombing missions. And one of the points that I'd like to make about this work as we transition into a broader sense of what Vivan does is how the work is coming off the wall now. We've got not just the flat drawing on the wall, but also that pan of oil in the foreground. So we're starting to see some of that three-dimensionality that will become the installation work that Vivan would later explore in works we've already seen, like the Cherville Archive.
We can add to that there is a relationship of the difference between the works that were the long night, that they are framed and there's a sense of depth about them. Here in this work, the whole thing folds up and folds in different ways, and that it is a view of the world as a map. The earlier is the view of the world as seen from the window. So that relationship already has made it a contemporary format. And I use the oil, as you said, to bring it into the tray and to bring the object, which then will further extend itself into other more complex installations.
Yeah, so I think what we're starting to see here, and this is something we'll see in other work that we address, is that play of the illusion of space in perspective versus the flattened out map-like forms, and in addition to that sort of growing literally into the space of the gallery. And I think we see that in perhaps the first really full-fledged installation that Vivan does in 1993, a work called Memorial that was conceived in response to the horrific communal violence that followed the destruction of the Babri Mosque in Ayodhya. Thousands of people were killed on the streets of India. And I'll let Vivan talk about this work more specifically, but even in this slide of the installation, which is it's a group of works that makes up this individual installation, you can see that there's a figure on the ground that is inspired by a photograph of one of the victims of the violence, and that photograph often serves as a springboard for these works within the piece itself.
So I'd like to add to that the relationship between the photograph, which is sometimes, as you see, very tiny things on the wall, and the fact that the photograph can be enlarged, and the fact that the photograph now is put on the ground, and that these are nails, and that these nails are put every time the exhibition takes place. So there's a performative element to it. And then moving to the same figure, which you see in the mausoleum, is like a kind of seagull-like plaster of cast relationship to the dead man, and to put that with the drawing that you see as inlay work in the marble relates to an aspect of abstraction, which then is speaking about an aspect of ascension, which you will see in subsequent works. And this central passage that you see, this will appear in many of the works. It forms both a road, but it's also the spine of the work. And it goes through to the end where you see this gateway, and it touches the wall to the ceiling. Yeah.
So we can look at just a few of the other pieces from other views from this this work. There's the mausoleum you see in the middle ground, another piece, Gun Carriage, which here you see you're seeing a fragment of that photograph of the victim on the ground.
So this was really an idea of how to move the figure from the fact that he's dead, and that it is moved now in a ceremonial way, so that the relationship between the dead body and the body, that how it is transfigured and transformed through sculptural objects, is then the agenda of this work. And next, if we can go to, is a work done almost 20 years later. And I thought that I would like to then establish a relationship of the photograph as an absence of the figure that is no longer there. And that then you enter the space with that memory, but then it becomes very dynamic and active through the fact that it's become a very large sculptural object. And so it then gets rejuvenated as a dynamic object with the steel beam going through it.
Great. So I'd like to just continue with this theme of big historical issues. A piece that Vivan does, another major installation here at the Victoria Memorial and Museum in Kolkata. And we have a short video clip that is part of the work. And it's something I should point out, we've mentioned film before, but now video becomes part of the pieces as well. And we'll see this continue as we explore his work. But let me just play the video for you. Just
if for Marx, the concept metaphor for history was the locomotive, then we cannot forget Walter Benjamin's sardonic afternote. History is not so much a train ride, but grabbing the emergency brake.
And we'll move from here to a couple of installation shots, and Vivan can speak a little more.
Well, as you can see from the other memorial and this in the Victoria Memorial, it's a site-specific installation of a very important work done by the colonial masters in memory of the Queen. And here I got the opportunity during the 50th anniversary of Indian independence to mark another alternative history, a critique of the colonial rule, and that through an iteration of objects. So there is a dynamic relationship between the spatial aspect and the temporal aspect, and that the two then reconfigure the meanings that in many of the things, as you see, the jute bags, which have reference to the strikes that have been done by both the peasants and the working class, and that this playful red chair is in fact seen through a large sculptural work which is photographed, and you see the traces of the Queen in these huge frames from the museum. So the meaning works through the object and the object back to the content.
And as we explore this issue of content and this issue of how one addresses it, can take us to other issues that Vivan has explored, including refuse. This is the beginnings of as we'll see, sort of very broad in its media that he uses, a series called Trash. Where he starts to engage the issue of refuse in contemporary society. And I want to show you a video that was part of this exploration where Vivan actually works with one of the trash pickers that he met in pursuing this project. So this is starring Marianne Hussain.
ठीक।
So I'm not sure if you have anything more you want to say about this, Vivan, before we move on. But
well, just to say the title, that as somebody said, all ascensions are brief, and that this moment of him getting out of his existence, he struggles to get out, but he's always being pulled back. And we've seen that even 70 years after independence, for what is happening today in India. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Yes, indeed. So just to give people a broader sense of trash, I mean, that video element is just but one, and we'll be familiar with Vivan's technique and strategy of using installation. This is an installation that's part of this same series, 12-bed ward, and I'll let Vivan talk about both the content, but also the materials that he's chosen with this work.
Working with these waste pickers, they came and said that these soles of the shoes, which they have to cut the top of them, that they have value. And so the irony of the sole has value. And therefore, I put this out as a very simple, minimal act of putting them there where you see the design and the pattern, but that also by the dim light, it's the shadows below that creates a kind of floating world, and that this then actually becomes a very poignant asset to this as you walk through. And again, as I said, there's a central axis, a central path. You go to the end and come back, and this central path then reappears subsequently as well.
And we also, in the trash series, there are installation aspects that Vivan constructed not to be experienced immediately by the viewer, but rather through photographs. And so what you see here is a construction that Vivan did in his studio, and the work of art itself is the photograph of the construction. And what we'll see in the different photographs of the same construction, we'll see two of them, three basically, and we'll see this play of perspectival versus the flattened out map-like form that we mentioned earlier with the series of drawings. And this is a huge construction. That, just to give you a sense of scale, it's something in the neighborhood of 72 feet deep. That red shape that you see, that rectangular shape that you see in the foreground, is a single bed, and those are bricks. So again, you get a sense of scale once you begin to recognize some of the objects. And that juxtaposition of space and perspective in one photograph versus the map-like quality of the master plan is something that I think Vivan can add to.
Well, from the start, when I was working with the waste pickers and I got this, the way that they pick up the garbage and then they sort them out, that is filthy garbage is continuously being sorted and replaced. And then thinking about the city, and the city then is made by garbage, but then actually given it a positive turn, like as if I'm an architect and I've planned the city out of garbage. And I think that there is agendas where people do think that you do not have to build everything with concrete and glass, and that there should be a much greater informal architecture. And in fact, it actually exists a major part of our cities. So I was just replicating that. And then this very intentional need, and I shot a video, so I had a crane which could see the whole thing from above. So you capture the 70 feet in one shot, digitally composed. And that then the pattern, the flattening of it, the itemization of what all is there available to the viewer to look at it. And we can see a close-up of it, and how that gives you a sense which you would not see in the perspectival shot. So the map or the plan view then becomes a kind of modernist pattern, but it also then is itemizing each of the things and objects in a very particular way.
And I'd like to show them one more of the trash series to underscore another connection to earlier work that we've seen, because and again, this is a photograph, but it's a photograph that has been digitally manipulated, and obviously digitally manipulated. Vivan is acknowledging that kind of constructive process that's taking place digitally, just like we saw with the retake of Amrita series, where you know that he has picked and chosen different parts of different photographs and reconstructed them into this arrangement. And so some of those...
Modernism does introduce other realities. The thing itself then acquires a meaning, and it's very necessary to then turn the new technologies to reinterpret the work, and that then, just some frames can become a glass star. So this need to continuously transform it, and in fact, what is ugly then actually gets a form, and it becomes, one can say, enters the space of beauty to look at. And this is something that continues in my work, to re-enter something which is discarded, to then again revitalize it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a duality, and I'm not the first to talk about this. Other people have mentioned this, but a kind of duality between the subject matter and the social issue of refuse and this transformation. And we can kind of see it, ethics and aesthetics come together in Vivan's work, and he's thinking in formal terms. He's thinking in pattern. He's thinking in the arrangement of the scene, but he's also choosing these subjects that he's treating in these aestheticized way, subjects that have importance to history and to contemporary culture and to the environment and other things that we care about. Another construction, in also using refuse, although in a different way, is an installation that Vivan made called Black Gold. And this is to give you a sense of its scale. This gives you a better sense of the forms themselves that he's creating. I'll let him tell you about the material that he's using and its historical significance. But as we do so, I think this is the best view to kind of understand what it is you're seeing once you understand the installation and the scale.
This work was produced in the first Kochi Muziris Biennale, and the port town of Muziris was the town that disappeared. And when I went there, they were excavating it, and the director, Chirian, was very happy that I would be interested to make work out of it. So I got hundreds and thousands of these potsherds and created an imaginary ruin, but also a site which could then be considered a kind of city. And that this was, as you saw, the top angle shot, would then be flooded, because the idea of again transforming that materiality which is here, and then because of the fact that it was flooded, I actually put the water through this installation.
And we'll show you, as we might have come to expect by now, it's not just the installation, but rather the installation becomes a launching point for other things as well. And we have just a short snippet of that video, which would have been projected. It was projected onto the floor on a similar scale to the installation itself. It's a 3-channel video, and this is, again, just a few seconds of it to give you a sense of it being flooded. And we can talk about the other materials and the significance as well in a moment.
So those are the peppercorns that are floating and move through this river that you saw from the top angle. And then the water flows out. And so the peppercorns then again become an ornament in this, and that's where the title Black Gold comes, because pepper was the item of exchange between Kerala and the Roman Empire.
which is, just to be clear, that's the era that these shards that he's using to make the work are coming from. So it all comes full circle into the piece itself. And, you know, these shards send Vivan in other directions as well, as we might come to expect. So now we're looking at a series that he did called Terra Optics, where he took those shards, but now, like we saw with trash, they are being used to create structures in the studio that then are photographed. And so it is the photograph that is the end product of the work of art. And in Terra Optics, we have here oil flowing through the structure. There are other versions where he's using heating elements that are stretched through the space, and they glow with light, the optic side of this. And the series has continued to develop, and I'll show you one from just a couple of years ago from a related series where Vivan is integrating fiber optics into the images. And I'll let Vivan kind of explain this a little bit more fully.
Well, already you could see that the reference of something that was 2,000 years old, and that I'm representing them with much more organized structures. Just to go back to that large installation, in fact, it was very interesting that I had an artist in my studio, and I made some of these forms. And then I told him he's from Kerala. And in fact, many students and young artists came and started working with it. So this aspect of the participants making those things, and as if they are toys and their forms, and this inclusiveness of others to make the work, to participate in its production, is something that interests me, that it's in some way critiquing the notion of the singular author. And here, in this jump from the earlier, which has the potsherds and some basic oil through it, that I got fascinated with it to enter the 21st century, if one can speak in that way, of how fiber optics now, connects the whole world and the internet through this. And so these fine lines are stretched across, and then to create a combination of the fiber optics, which you can see now, the potsherds have been structured, they form arches, and they then cross over through the mesh of the fiber optic lines. And that then, because the fiber optic glows, I said I must now make it a light box and a light object. And that's what it is. It's a light box, and the light is glowing from the image itself.
Yeah, not unlike those Autochromes from the Shergill archive that we saw before, a backlit image that has that glowing quality here suspended in the gallery space. And I want to switch gears for a second and tell you about a side of Vivan that we haven't really talked about. There's humor in his work. There's playfulness in his work. There's maybe even a little bit of irreverence in his work sometimes. And I wanted to show you a work, or a series of works, that came out of the use of refuse in trash. And this is a series called Dagawaka Making Strange. And here's a video of some of the products. Yeah, that's a hard one, just to pick a few of the outfits, because they're playful, they're whimsical, all using sort of found and recycled materials. And that whimsy, that playfulness, and maybe a little bit of that irreverence that I mentioned, we can go way back and see that in Vivan's work here. A superposition that Vivan himself suggested of a painting from 1965 and a series of drawings he did a year or so later. The painting is a perspectival view of a street overlaid with those stripes that you see. And if you look closely, the windows of the buildings in the streets have been filled with photographs of erotic sculpture from Khajuraho. And the works you see on the superimposed on it are book plates of illustrations of erotic sculptures from Khajuraho that Vivan has drawn on. And he's given the yakshi pants, and he has turned the couple into a modern couple. And I don't know if you can read it from on your screens, but the woman in the pants, there's written in text next to it. It says "stretches much with stretch fabrics." So it becomes this sort of commentary on contemporary culture. Or the one on the right says, "Hey, honey, let's get out of here fast before they find out who we are." So again, there's this humor, this playfulness that has manifested itself in the works that came out of Trash. But it also gives me an opportunity to underscore something that Vivan just mentioned. And that's the collaborative nature of his work. And that collaborative nature it's been there all along, but I think it has grown over the years. And for this series of Gagawaka, which by the name is as playful as the work itself, it comes from a combination of Lady Gaga and then the song that was popular at the World Cup, the Waka Waka song. But this is growing out of a collaboration with a fashion designer, Pratima Pandey. And so, working hand in hand is something that we'll see as a major facet of what Vivan does. And
Hello.
Yes.
Can I add to that?
Please.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I heard?
Yes.
That all fashion designers take out their sketchbook and start making drawings. But because I was working with the tailors in the workshop, and so every object I would pick up and I would put it against it and use it very much, and never draw, but keep on building it up. And then suggesting to the tailor, you cut it like this. The details she helped, but it was very much a relationship of a playful nature with a range of objects. And so this using the hand and not the drawing book was an important feature in how these were made.
Excellent. And one last point about these is they will be on view probably this time next year here in my home city of New York at the Museum of Art and Design. So they will be like the works at the Met, available to a large audience here in New York soon. Now, back to this issue of the collaborative Vivan, and this is something he's been doing for a long time. And I just brought in an example of a show that he does that includes collaborative works. There's Vivan on the right behind that painting that we saw just a moment ago.
Can I interject into this, Paul? Because you're articulating it very well, but give me a chance. In 1992, when I did this work, it was post a long decade of painting, narrative painting. And then came this point where I wanted to turn it inside out. And so then I quote my earlier paintings, which you already saw, and then using this word collaboration combined, formally saying that I am now going to work with different people. So I work with architects, and the next slide you can show is working with photographers, and who I in a sense, curate. So I got 8 photographers from there, Neeta Singh to Ram Rahman and others, and was reading Roland Barthes. And I foregrounded the quotations in front of the photograph. So behind each quotation is the photograph which you see reflected in the mirror, and that it's a 2,000 kilo column, and that these fragile photographs are just pasted with tape. And so this completely counter things are then making this, and some comment that Barthes made that after over 100 years, there's hardly any monument to photography.
There is now. Yeah.
There is now, yes.
And continuing this collaborative theme, I just wanted to spend a moment with a more recent collaborative work that Vivan did, Meanings of Failed Action, which is a piece that engages a not well-known event in the moments leading up to Indian independence, where there were strikes going on in Bombay, and the Navy threatened an insurrection. And it, as the title suggests, it didn't succeed, but it was this sort of moment of uprising. And when we think about this as a collaborative work, it's a work that, as we'll see, certainly addresses history much the way that Vivan had done with Memorial and other works like that. But it's including working with an engineer and working with the well-known film historian Ashish Rajayaksha and the sound artist David Chapman, all coming together and working to create not just this exterior, this boat-like form, but it's a boat-like form that you enter. And it's an immersive experience, no pun intended. Again, we have just a short snippet of video to give you a sense of what the experience inside is like.
A large amount of this material.
So there was this revolutionary atmosphere, and talking to the comrades during the afternoon and evening when I was there in party headquarters, they were wondering if this might be the signal for revolution. Everybody, had their memories that the Russian Revolution of 1905 had begun with the mutiny of the Black Sea Fleet.
So Vivan, go ahead. You wanted to mention something?
No, just to say that that this work coming out of this collaboration was linking archival material, plus as well as Ashish Rajayaksha brought a lot of reference to the Indian context. And so even the languages of Bengali and Marathi are used, and that this 40-seater boat that is a kind of mobile theater was then experienced with a 40-minute sound work. So it was highly constructed work of that moment.
Great. And as we continue thinking about those collaborations, I want to, again, extend a little bit even further and mention or talk more about something that Carol mentioned at the beginning, the Kasauli Art Center, which Vivan helped found in 1976, taking I think it's fair to say, a family retreat in Kasauli and turning it into a place where artists could meet and create a sense of community. And I can certainly say that sort of collaborative environments, for me at least, tend to amplify a kind of creative and scholarly energy. And I think the Kasauli Art Project was a major feature in that. And again, that idea of collaboration extending to support and community building and mentorship is something that Vivan has been doing. And I'll let Vivan say more about.
If I can just say that it all started in 76, and that spontaneously artists came, they would make their work, it would be a residency, they would have a good time. But here, there was a moment when I found that there were a group of young sculptors who were doing very interesting work. So this is the first time that the workshop has the discipline of sculpture, and that this actually ended up in a major exhibition titled 7 Young Sculptors. And this was a turning point in contemporary Indian sculpture. So this was a moment where it was given a direction, but the rest was, a lot of work produced, but there was a lot of creative, spontaneous things that took place. One in an open air theater, which you can connect to, and then we'll move on. So here is a fun, as if it's from a Bollywood film.
Sorry, this is the one you're speaking of.
No, just to go back, just to show that space. that in this space, what you see next is the slab on which theater took place. You can go to the next because we're running out of time.
Okay, I just want to give them a slight sense of what they're going to see.
Can I say that it's
Sure.
called the fall of the slab because there was a structure which was illegal, and I thought that rather than just destroy it, that I should make an event out of it. And therefore then the fact that it was called a building cut, which is a quotation of Gordon Martha Clark, that I actually do make it visible to an audience of an interdisciplinary performance that take place with architects. Can you start the video? And
Yes.
with sound artist.
Yeah, it's going to be.
Is part of this sort of statement that this performance aspect has, and various expressionist elements are framed now or imaged now.
So Vivan, tell us, as we close up, I know we want to leave some time for questions. So what's the future of that space?
After everything that breaks, you have to remake it. And I'm hoping that every time this lockdown stops the project from moving. But basically the idea is that I will return to the tin roof and then on that construct a metal stage, and that here will be a multi-purpose hall with projectors, with a certain sound acoustic work, and also place to stay. So actually the outhouse will actually shift from the main house to become the central unit of activity. And I hope that now that we have an organization and we have a director as well as a deputy director who will then able to take this forward, and not just from a summer camp, but run it for 6 months. This is my dream and I hope it comes true.
Yeah, and I think just that sort of underscores this the collaborative, the community, and the mentoring side of Vivan that is an important part of his investment in the contemporary art scene. And with that, I know we're running a little bit over with what we had, the amount of time we had planned to take. So I'm going to stop my share and hand it back over to Carol, and she can facilitate the question and answers.
Thank you very much. That was, there's so much to think about and to discuss further, but I'll try to keep us focused here. But one aspect that struck me is, you started the presentation with the painting, and then as we were looking at trash, Terra optics, and black gold, I wonder, Vivan, if you could comment just a bit on your relationship to photography, but particularly that with digital tools, it seems to be a kind of an interesting phase of work that relates so closely to your earlier painting.
That's a good point you made, Carol, because right through the 80s, we as a group kind of had a movement called towards narrative painting. So the narrative aspect of my work has always been there. And that once the digital tool, as I call it, that I could then reconstruct, family album, which millions of people have once photography came, to the homes of the middle class. But then it's how you then reconstruct them. Now, it just happened that my grandfather was not known. He just did these photographs, and fortunately they were kept. And I realized that they had something quite unique about them. And by my making these, they came into the public sphere, and that people now recognize him as one of the pioneers of modern Indian photography. But that this narrative is something that always returns whenever some material I take on. So if you take the simple photograph of the daughter or the mother, or the two sisters, or Umrao Singh himself, reconstruct it to kind of tell a complex narrative.
And interestingly, as you get to the other series, there is that, especially with Amrita, the retake of Amrita, your particular attention to found objects, found images, also in memorial. But with Terra Optics and Black Gold, the photographic part of the work is your creation, your, in essence, creating the image as you were earlier with your paintings. Is that correct to say?
That also comes from trash. I mean, collecting the trash. And as Ruth Rosengarten has said, that taking the pictures from your old family album are almost, shall we say, forgotten, and then you pick them up and reuse them. So the trash and the photographs are kind of a distant cousin. And I think that the recycling of it, whether it's a photograph or the garbage, or to use material that is 2000 years old, and be able to create a panoramic space, and then bring it to other mediums like engine oil, is every time giving it a new dimension.
Now I'm going to just ask a very particular process question. One of our audience members would like to know more about the Autochromes, how they were produced and how you manipulated them or created the installation out of them.
Yeah, well, it's quite remarkable that Umrao Singh, who was at one level an amateur photographer, but he had an interest in the science of photography, and he got hold of autochromes, which a very not such a known fact is autochromes were invented by the Lumiere brothers, who are known to have made cinema. But Peter Wallen told me that the Lumiere brothers considered the autochrome making a color image a more advanced bit of technology than something that just moves. So anyway, they came to my grandfather's notice, and there are just about a dozen of them. And in fact, hardly any more exist, but I think there is an autochrome museum that Kodak has. And again, like using the others, and I got fascinated by the quality of the small dots, and they're sometimes considered as pointillist, and that these of 4 members of the family should then be presented, they're just small 4 inches by 6 inches plates, that how I can enlarge them, and then again, in a sense, by creating them as 4 black boxes of the family, are in a sense, as I said, like a kind of memorial to them, or to the photographic image.
And just to be clear, to help people understand the autochrome, I think the analog that we might understand better is a color slide. That it's a positive image, but it's transparent. It's like a slide that you have to backlight it to see it. So it's a larger version of that. And it was one of the first versions of color photography before there were even viable ways to print in color. And so they do have this magical feel because they need to be backlit. And it was something that a lot of art photographers at the turn of the century were experimenting with their Steichen and Stieglitz autochromes as well.
Which brings me to another question about the approach in your work, some of the stylistic references. So maybe I should step back. Can you comment a bit about your experience studying at Slade and then returning to India to work and being insistently about being within and persisting in poking and probing at your immediate context around you? There's an audience member here who asks about sort of your relationship to Western abstraction, for instance. And I know that your works are sort of rich in their references. So perhaps a comment on some of the influences.
If I can say, at the Slade, which at one level was a conservative school, but the director Coldstream actually introduced through a friend of his, a documentary, a filmmaker, to start a film department. And I think that had a great impact on me, as I said, that whether it was filmed on the World War or others, so that cinema became very much part of my mental makeup. I mean, I would see 4 films a week, etc. And that then the relationship between Kitai's position, and he was a very opinionated person. And for him, I mean, if anything was dead and should be flogged, it was all those empty, big, large, abstract paintings. And that he was a very complex, figurative artist. And he had a great sense of form and of design, and that he wasn't just, he went back in some ways to more narrative painting. But another little anecdote, that with a group of painting which I mentioned, a group of artists introduced a kind of narrative painting, and Kitai kind of became a kind of father figure because he had started a similar exhibition called The Human Clay in London, reviving figurative painting. So that formed a strong basis of that relationship where the Slade, extended itself. And of course, the Slade being part of University College, as I said, that political things were happening, and that I was half the time outside and not in my cubicle painting. So that made a great difference to me. And of course, as I say, I'm a child of May 68.
It's certainly true that the cinematographic is a strong sort of thread through your work, even the way that you use text and layer your images. But I want to be sensitive to those tuning in. We are just past our hour. I wanted to thank you, Vivan and Paul, for sharing with us a fascinating and illuminating presentation. To the members of our audience, thank you for your participation. Vivan, I wanted to give you the last word and ask you how you are faring. I know that it seems that you're ready to get going on your construction project, but I leave the last few seconds to you.
Yeah, well, that is an important part, but I have support of the institution, and I hope that moves. And then the rest, of course, is my own work, which is photography based. But when that happens, then you will know a little more about it. But I am continuing to do, yes, one word I forgot to say, which is that I don't take photographs, I make photographs.
That's a key statement to end this program on. Thank you so much, Vivan. And again, Paul, thank you for
it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Guiding us through this immense body of work. I am also grateful to Essa Epstein of CPI, Grace Murray, and Yin Chen of the Freer Sackler Public Programs team, and Mary Mulcahy of the Curatorial Department for making today's program possible. Everyone, I invite you to visit the studio. This particular program and a recording of it will be available in the Freer Sackler's Contemporary Art virtual space, the studio. Please visit us online. You'll find the link in the chat. Thank you all for sharing your time with us. I look forward to following up with the both of you and seeing everyone again soon. Take care.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for putting this up.